Dobrý den.
Hello. Well, before I start talking about the 80s, then I'd like to use my favorite example of the three constructions or structures, and I'll explain what we mean by integrity and why it is overlooked. It is these three buildings. All of us know them. These are iconic key construction of the Czech post-war architecture. So we did construction architectural research, and we identified very many phenomena that repeat in all the projects. However, each of the project was built in a different era, in a different area, by different architects with different approaches to architecture. But some phenomena do repeat, so they capture the era and they capture the focus of architecture as such. It is a thermal hotel in Karlsbad, Nová Scéna in Prague, and Ještěd. And now I'll tell you what phenomena did repeat in the constructions. Ještěd, it is a TV tower and hotel. Thermal is a festival hall hotel, and Nová Scéna, it is a theater and administrative part of the National Theater. Very complex operations, and the constructions, all of them worked very well. All of these constructions are extraordinary because of the very complex operation and ambitions of the architects who worked with a very complex mass solution. Vítkovice Steelworks did cooperate with all the architects. It is a suspended facade, suspended ceilings. Nová Scéna theater. People do not know that there are these bridge constructions. We know it under the glass. That the same applies to thermal hotel. It looks like a compact building, but it hides a very fine steel construction. All of the constructions work with modernist concept, round disposition. Thermal works with the inner landscape. Nová Scéna theater works with a baroque spirit. These are the views that it offers. And all of these structures are authentic, modernist architecture. However, at the same time, they reflect their context in a very sensitive way. Ještěd is a continuation of the mountain. Thermal reflects the landscape of Karlsbad, and Nová Scéna theater just follows up the historical building of the National Theatre. And they are modern buildings at the same time, contextual buildings. The buildings are anchored in the ground. It is a modernist concept connected to the neighboring environment. In Ještěd case, it is the material used and the shape of the tower. You cannot really tell where's the border between the external or outside terraces and the interior of the tower. Nová Scéna theater, the piazzetta somehow flows inside the building, and it is a fluent interconnection of the interior and exterior that we can see here. In all the three buildings, there is a very expressive architecture. You just enter the building, take a staircase, and you just see the Bella Vista, lovely view of Prague, of Jizerské mountains or Carlsbad. Roof terraces are used in the Thermal Hotel, Nová Scéna Theatre. You take the wonderful staircase, pass all these statues, and enter a big hall with a view of the street and the historical environment. All the three buildings use the modernist concept of openness of views, but they are cozy at the same time. Have a look at the furniture in Ještěd. These are the egg-shaped armchairs, and they were designed to give the impression of coziness, although the architecture is open. The same applies to Nová Scéna Theatre. In all the buildings you get the wonderful panoramatic views, and they attract you to the environment of the building. All of the three buildings work with integrated details. Thermal Hotel example. You can see the heating, aircon, lighting, door systems. Reduction of technical elements. And when you're inside the building, then in each part of the construction, in each part of the Ještěd tower, you can tell that you are in the tower. In each part of the Nová Scéna Theatre, you can tell that you are in that building. So it's very valuable. All the three buildings were designed as Gesamtkunstwerk in cooperation with designers, with artists, as a complex or holistic experience. All of them, carry the character of their times. So are we able to accept that this is a part of the era, that this should be conserved? Do we know who were the authors of this design? These elements were used in all prefab blocks of houses, but this is the perception of architecture as a whole. And let me get back to the three buildings. The Nová Scéna is listed, Thermal is not listed. Nová Scéna is a cultural heritage for 2 years. And we still perceive only some of the aspects of the constructions. Thermal, we perceive brutalism. Nová Scéna Theatre, we all perceive the serpentines and the glass displays, glass blocks. We are unable to perceive the buildings as a whole. And there is a debate about these three buildings reconstructions or renovations. So are we going to renovate only the important aspects and leave behind all the other elements that we don't perceive as important? It seems to me that often our perception is oversimplified. 50s are perceived as late functionalism and socialist architecture conflict, like that there would not be any other architecture. 60s, experimental style, Brussels style, brutalist style. Usually the world is more complex, more it offers more facets as well as architecture, and sometimes we simply overlook and we ignore some of the aspects. And in my second part, I want to share with you examples of the architecture of 80s. We worked for the Ministry of Culture in this research, and we tried to identify characteristic features for the architecture of 80s, and we were not able to identify anything. It is a long transitional period from the new modernism. We were not able to define a phenomenon or several phenomena typical for the architecture of the 80s. Well, eventually we identified a kind of specific, authentic, artistic approach of the architects. So it's not a general statement, but individual approaches of the architects. We've got a number of buildings of the 80s that follow up the Gesamtkunstwerk of the 60s, in particular in the interiors. And then there are numerous constructions of the 70s and 80s that work with simple standardized elements like panels and so on, and are able to create a very, very effective humanized collage. And architects like Martin Reinisch use very simple, banal elements, and they compose them in a way that they created a humanized, avant-garde leftist approach. They didn't need this big architecture like the Palace of Culture. No, it was a smaller buildings, smaller architecture, worth of the preservation or protection. Big topic of the architecture of the 80s is improvisation, like the Uran department store. Emil Přikryl turned it into a very diverse facade, underground station budovatelů. It was built with very poor materials, and the poor quality elements were upgraded and elevated to a higher level, like use of ceramic tiles was frequent. The architects didn't want to hide the problematic skeletons of the buildings. It is a style that is present in very many projects, and it defines the architecture of that period as a whole. A typical topic of 80s was the level of the sidewalk. It was the
jenom na panelové domy.
These prefab houses were of a poor quality, and it creates a identity of the housing estate, and the identity can be of a very high quality. Very many architects didn't want to do these big pro-regime projects. They preferred smaller construction. They worked with wood and other traditional materials. They were opposed about the misused or abused architecture. Postmodernist modern architecture copies the historical examples, and it relates to functionalism, and pluralism element is very much present here. The modernism is over, so let's build something that reflects all the eras, and it's very convincing. Technicist architecture. High-tech uses wood for the envelope, and it is very authentic. Architecture as design. It simply comes across the whole work. It's not used in exterior only. So this is the architectural stance or position that is important. It's very difficult to categorize such buildings. The buildings usually work with the context. And here we have a very diverse net of different ideas. And after the oil crisis of the 80s, people focused on energy savings. So we've got some examples of such architecture. In Tachov, we have a pool from this period. It is the environment-friendly building, and perhaps it would deserve to be put on the list of preserved buildings. Let me conclude saying that it is necessary to emphasize the diversity of the 80s. The diversity cannot be summarized under one style. However, we must say that the architects, the authors, were very authentic, and their relation to the world is reflected in their buildings. So this was stated by Petr Kratochvíl, a Czech theorist, in his book on current Czech architecture. He says there are no style categories in the Czech architecture. It is important to see how does the author, the architect, relate to the world via his or her work. So we shouldn't use these criteria of beauty as mentioned by Professor Schwarcha any longer. We should really assess the architecture by the author's reflection of the world. Thank you very much.